This is AJ Wachtel. Welcome to my podcast, Wachtelligence, where I discuss with my guests the past, present, and future of the local and national music scene with a focus on Boston and New England. In today's episode, James Montgomery Really Blows is about the legendary life and career of one of the greatest blues harp players alive today and my longtime friendship with him. For more than 50 years, James has really lived a life on the road, keeping the blues alive. His reputation as the music heir to Sonny Boy Williamson I and James Cotton makes him well known and well respected wherever the blues and R&B are heard today. James, welcome to Wachtelligence.
You know, it's such a pleasure to be here, AJ. I'm finally glad to see you made something of yourself. You know, for you listeners of the podcast here, you might not know this, but AJ and I go back. I was born in a log cabin I helped my father build, and then shortly after that, I met AJ. But AJ and I go back a long, long, long way, and it's just a pleasure to be on your show, AJ. And congratulations on getting a podcast. You know.
Thanks, James. I know you, like you said, for almost 40, maybe 45 years.
It's longer than that, I think, but let's not get too carried away.
But you were born in Detroit and you came to Boston to attend Boston University, and now you're a longtime resident of Rhode Island. Tell us about, briefly about how you came to Boston.
Well, I'll tell you, there were some riots in Detroit in 1967, I knew John Lee Hooker back then. I played with John Lee Hooker when I was 19. Two things happened. After the riots in Detroit, John Lee Hooker moved as far west as you could go without swimming. He went to Oakland. And I went as far east as you could go without swimming. I went to Boston. So, honestly, I really wanted to go to school in Boston. I was in a jug band in high school, which, long story, turned out to be great the first time I played with Les Paul. But anyway, I was in a jug band in high school, and so one of the guys' parents used to summer in Martha's Vineyard. So I knew all about the folk scene in Boston. I knew all the nightclubs. I knew the Paul's Mall Jazz Workshop, the Unicorn. And I knew about the music scene, and I knew that the Jim Kweskin Jug Band played there, and I knew Maria Muldaur hung out there, and Jeff Muldaur. So I desperately wanted to get accepted somewhere in Boston, and Harvard turned me down, but BU accepted me. So, so I ended up at BU, and I swear that my parents dropped me off in front of Miles Standish Dormitory, and I was going, oh boy, am I glad to get rid of those people. And, was waving goodbye, and I looked across the street. There was a guy with a guitar. Before I even checked into the dormitory, I was jamming on the street with Bob McCarthy, the legendary folk guitar player who I'm doing a gig with at the end of April. So within 10 minutes after being in Boston, I was jamming on the street playing blues.
Well, you know that I also lived in Miles Standish Hall, as did Barry Tajian from Barry and the Remains.
Well, and me and Skunk Baxter, we
right.
went on to become guitar player for the Doobies and Steely Dan. We had a jam band that we played in the basement of Miles Standish. So, and I still work with Skunk Baxter. I called him like 3 weeks ago where I'm putting a benefit together for hunger. And, I played his birthday party last year, the big thing down in D.C. with a bunch of musicians from all over the world. So, it's funny because, all the people that I met in my early days and played with, I still stay in touch with, I still play with. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about music. It's such a sharing medium. It's meant to be shared. Poetry is meant to be read aloud, and music is meant to be shared. And when you share those experiences with people, they become lifelong friends, and that's one of the beautiful things about it. And by the way, during the pandemic, I'm sharing music with my cat, and we're developing a friendship that I don't even want to talk about.
Absolutely
not. On the podcast.
Hey, I want to also mention that, for people that don't know, Miles Standish Dormitory, which we're talking about, is located in Kenmore Square, 2 blocks from Fenway Park. And it used to be a hotel, and Babe Ruth and the Yankees used to stay there, too. That was a big legend. You knew about that, right?
Well, yeah, and I was in room 711, which is
his old room, the boy suite, right?
Well, no, Willie Loman, and Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman, he goes to Miles Standish Arms and commits suicide in room 711. And years later, I met Arthur Miller and spent a day with him, and he was a fascinating guy. And because I took my English education seriously at BU, I was able to talk about Shakespeare and Ionesco and all these great playwrights. Arthur Miller, one of the we talked for hours and hours about literature, and then he looks at his watch. He goes, "Hey, the Knicks are on in 15 minutes. Let's go out and buy a 6-pack." So I go out with Arthur Miller. We buy a 6-pack of beer and watch the Knicks.
That's funny. Hey, let's talk about the first, you forming the first James Montgomery Band in Boston. Well, I'm still friends with the guys, I think.
Well, yeah, I got hired by the Caldwell Winfield Band. I hadn't played music in a couple of years. I took a couple of years off and lived, close to a monastic life. But and that's personal. I don't want to get into too much of that. So I hadn't played, and then I went to Detroit because my mom was sick, and I wanted to be with the family. And I ended up, by the end of that summer, I ended up playing with the J.B. Douglas Band and the Gold Brothers. So when I came back to Boston, I wanted to play again, and I got hired by the Caldwell Winfield Band, and now half of that band lived in Boston, and the other half lived in Woodstock. And as a matter of fact, the half that lived in Woodstock was the band on Van Morrison's Moondance record. Those were all Caldwell Winfield guys. But anyway, so I wanted to play more often because they would only go out every once in a while because they had hit the big time. They opened for Janis Joplin and the Chambers Brothers. So they only did these big time gigs. So there was a bar called the Candlelight Lounge in Cambridge on Western Avenue or River, whichever one's the one-way thing there. But anyway, so there was a little blues scene there, and Luther Guitar Jr., Snake Boy Johnson was playing there, and Noni and John. God, they were great. So I wanted to play more often. So I had I'd taken the bus out with Billy Mather from Detroit, my bass player from the high school days. And I was using Chuck Piro, the drummer from the Caldwell Winfield Band, on drums. And then I wanted Billy Caldwell, who was my boss, I wanted him to play guitar in this band so we could work more often at the Candlelight. And, he took a big hit of Calvert whiskey and took a big drag on a cigarette. He exhaled and he looked at me, he says, "Okay," he says, "I'll play with your band." He says, "But we have to name the band after you in case it sucks." So we called it the James Montgomery Band. And that's a true story.
That's funny. Hey, but one of the things that a lot of people don't know is eventually, really, not too long after that, is that you were the first Northern band to sign for Capricorn Records.
Yeah, we were, and we were being courted by Warner Brothers, Atlantic, and Capricorn. Eventually we went with Capricorn because we thought we would get more individual attention, and they had the same distributor, Warner Electra Atlantic. They were, Capricorn had a deal with them. In retrospect, I wish I'd have gone with Atlantic. But the great thing about Capricorn was, we got to, we basically did gig after gig for 3 years with the Allman Brothers and Leonard Skinner and Marshall Tucker. And in that respect, it was a great label because all of the label mates, got to know each other. And Alex Taylor ended up down there, and Martin Mull, but anyway, it was a great experience. I spent a lot of time in Georgia, and they eventually, when the label went bankrupt, they charged us for the dinner that they took us out to get us to sign. I thought that was a classy move.
Hey, that's funny. I want talk about
The other thing, AJ, well, still on subject, it was interesting because here I am. I'm born in Detroit. The band is from Boston, and for years, even to this day, I'm in these magazines called Southern Rock. Yeah, that's me. Born in Detroit, play out of Boston. How more Southern Rock can you get?
I lost control a while ago when you did what you do. You keep me coming back for more and more. Can't get enough of you, you know. I just want to take a little bit, but you gave me a lot. Now I just can't get enough of it. There must be something in the stuff. Come on now. Intoxicated. Intoxicated with you. Intoxicated. Intoxicated with you.
Hey, you picked me up to go to, I think maybe the last Allman Brothers show, where it was at the Bank of America, and you got up. I had the best seat in the house. I was sitting on stage 10 feet behind Greg, and you got up and played Statesboro Blues. Please tell us about that.
Well, yeah, I forgot. I was going to show you all these pictures of it. That was a great thing about the Allman Brothers, and people always ask me, what's your favorite band to tour with? And for years, well, I don't know. There's so many good ones and all this stuff, and then but in retrospect, I have an answer for that question. It was definitely the Allman Brothers. They were the, when I first started touring, there were a lot of English bands that had just taken off,
Yeah.
And the English bands, all the road crew guys called them teabags, and they were very difficult. They would pull plugs on you. They wouldn't let you use all their lighting systems. They didn't want to get put away by the opening act, so they didn't give you a lot of access. Sometimes they weren't that friendly. But the Allman Brothers were like, everybody backstage was, "Hey partner," or "Hey buddy." And you could just go right into their dressing room. I mean, we had Cheese Whiz and M&Ms in our dressing room, and that's it. After many complaints, we finally trashed the dressing room in Cincinnati. But anyway, but the Allman Brothers were like, "Yeah, come on in, man, eat with us, hang with us," and really great people. And Greg Allman to me. And I get teary-eyed when I think about it. He was one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life, and just the sweetest guy, and just so laid back and so kind of shy in a way. He was just one of a kind, and I loved working with him. So he always made sure that, on the very first gig that we played with him, or one of the first. Well, the first gig we played him was Nassau Coliseum, and I was throwing up before I went on. I was so nervous, but I did that a lot in those days. But then the next show we did was Trenton State Fairgrounds, and it wasn't that long after Woodstock, so there was like 125,000 people there. And Greg told me, he said, "Listen, if you want, you can come up and just see the whole show, and from behind my Leslie speakers." They were. And them and the Grateful Dead were the first ones to have multiple monitor speakers all over the stage. But in the meantime, I made the mistake of looking at the size of the crowd and seeing 125,000 people out there, and then I got nervous all over again. But I'll tell you what, we got 2 encores on that show. And while we were playing, the Allman Brothers were because there's 125,000 people. While we were playing, the Allman Brothers were coming in helicopters, almost one at a time, because there were like 4 or 5 helicopters bringing them in. And even though the audience was cheering, because they knew what it was, they knew the Allman Brothers were coming in. And even though they got cheered and they knew the Allman Brothers were backstage, they still gave us 2 encores, even though they were waiting for the Allman Brothers to come on. But it was a different time back then. If you played well, you know, you didn't have to have a bunch of hit records. You know, if you just played great music, you know, we got taken off tours because we were going over better than the headliners.
Hey, you know, I remember after that show, you drove me home, and we sat right in front of my house in the driveway, and you played me at 3 a.m. your brand new, at the time, unreleased album with Johnny Winter on it, with the Johnny Winter song.
I remember that.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Johnny Winter. You know, you helped him get straight. You were in his band.
Yeah, you know, they played around with hiring me for on and off for a few years. Teddy Slatus did, his manager, because Johnny was you know, supposedly weak and ill health, and they wanted someone to, you know, and after every show, people going, wow, you know, look at Johnny's in such poor health. So they wanted me. You know, I like move around a lot and ham it up and all this stuff on stage. So they wanted me to kind of distract, you know, from Johnny. So I was supposed to be like, you know, somebody to make the band, you know, look more energetic and all that stuff. And at first they started me out in the front of the stage, and I didn't want to be in the front, you know, and I remember the audience in Texas didn't like me in front either because they pelted me with beers all when I was up there. But anyway, so I just said, listen, Johnny, it's Johnny's band. I'm not going to sit out in front of this band, you know. So as it turned out, you know, me and Paul Nelson, the road manager at the time, we started putting two and two together after a while on the road, and after a year or so, you could see certain patterns and certain things that were going on, and we determined that the manager was keeping him on a ton of prescription drugs. You know,
Teddy was.
Yeah, maybe 20 pills a day, and Johnny is so obsessive compulsive, like he knew exactly what time of the day he should take each pill, and you know, you could see him look down at his watch at exactly the right minute every day, and he was always right on the money. So anyway, I got him a new doctor. I had a program called Debbie Blue at the time. It was a organization, a foundation, where we provided health care for all New England blues musicians or musicians who were visiting New England. Actually, we got Huey Lewis an appointment for some kind of minor eye problem while he was out here. But anyway, who by the way, is I talked to recently. He was just on an episode of The Blacklist. But anyway. So, you know, so I got him this guy, Dr. Larry Hodis, who then was chief of staff, a physician and chief at Mount Sinai Hospital. And he called me up the next day and he says, I can't believe the drugs they have this guy taking. He said, some of them cancel each other out. Some of them are dangerous to be taken simultaneously. So I'm basically the guy who got him a new doctor and got him on a new regimen. And then, you know, Paul Nelson took over from there and just did a tremendous job of getting him off everything. But within 8 months, Johnny was taking 0 pills, which shows you how many. It shows you how many he really needed. He needed none. And then he himself quit drinking and eventually quit smoking pot. And the day I heard Johnny Winter stop smoking marijuana, I went out and I started stocking up on potable water and cans with late expiration dates on it because I was certain the world was coming to an end. I was certain the apocalypse is around the corner when I heard Johnny Winter stop smoking marijuana.
You know,
you know, so, you know, at the end of his life, even though he might have looked frail, you know, and it was because we didn't discover the extent of his cataracts until near the very end. So, and, you know, being born with albinoism, you know, they, often have problems with eye problems anyway. But even though it looked like he was frail at the end of his life, he was strong as an ox, and he was on a great diet. His wife, Susan, took great care of him. Paul Nelson, slowly but surely, we took one step at a time. We took him off of methadone.
I saw it.
and you know, and then one day for Christmas, Paul Nelson gave him a series of boxes, and each box became smaller and smaller until there was nothing in it. And Johnny said, "Well, there's nothing in this box." And Paul said, "Yeah, that's right, because that's your methadone dose, and you haven't had a methadone dose in 6 months." The very last time I saw him, we played a show together in Mystic, Connecticut, and I had a gig that night. But I went on his trailer, and so the last time I saw him, I was alone on a trailer with him, and I said, "Johnny, I love you," and he just said, he looked at me with that look of his, and he said, "I love you, James. I love you, James." And I walked out of that trailer, and that was the last I ever saw of him, but it was fitting, I think, that we were alone in the trailer the last time I saw him.
You know, like I said, when I mentioned to him that I had just gone to the see you play with the Allman Brothers Band, and I knew that he was tight with the Allman Brothers Band also, so I said, you know, Greg was back there, and there was no alcohol served at all. And I said, that was pretty amazing. I said, he just had a liver transplant, and I said, he must not be drinking as much. And Johnny, without batting an eye, goes, he has a new liver. Maybe he's drinking a lot more. And me and him just laughed.
Well, I guess I shouldn't say this, but when I had my harmonica case was a big tackle box, there was room in the bottom of it for one beer. And when I was sitting there with Allman Brothers or Greg, he would allow me to come in and have that one beer backstage with him. He never had any. He never drank any, but he would allow me to have one beer. It was the only beer in the dressing room, and you know, geez, I hope Bert Holman doesn't hear this and call me up and read the riot act to me, because Bert Holman was another one of those guys who really, you know, there's managers throughout history, some of whom I won't name because it's personal, but I think everyone knows Bert Holman was the guy who really, gave Greg a really solid platform to maintain great health and to not get involved in all those things. I did a gig in DC one night, and James Cotton was playing down the street. So my gig was at the cellar door, which got over early. It was kind of a boutique jazz room, and Cotton was playing the Bayou, which was one of these blues clubs that closed at 2. So I rushed over to sit in with Cotton that night, and Greg Allman showed up, and it was his first day out of rehab. And this blow dealer comes in and starts pulling him aside, say, "Hey, Greg, look at this stuff, man. You're going to love it." And we just looked at the Cotton's road crew, and that guy lasted about 6 seconds. That guy lasted. About 6 seconds that guy lasted in the dressing room before he was forcibly thrown out. I mean, so that's the kind of thing that we were all dealing with in those days. And Bert Holman, the Allman Brothers manager, did an incredibly great job, making sure that Greg had a good base to work from.
Hey, you just brought up Cotton. Let's talk about Cotton for a while. Your style, your harmonica playing style is, to me, Sonny Boy Williamson the first, and it goes to James Cotton, and then it goes to James Montgomery. I could say a lot of chords, huffing and puffing. How about playing 10 seconds so everybody can hear what you really sound like?
Well, okay, here we go. I call this one Christmas in Poland. No, I'm only kidding anyway. Although that's probably what it sounds like. Anyway, I was never really good enough to play like Sonny Boy. Peter Wolf told me one time, and I love Peter Wolf. He's such an amazing guy. And I think one of the most, I think Peter Wolf, Don Law, and Fred Taylor are the three most important people in the history of Boston music. But anyway, Peter Wolf told me one time, I think it might have been the first time I met him at some kind of music event at that studio on the Newberry Street that the Cars ended up buying. He pulled me aside and says, James,
Synchro Sound.
Yeah, Synchro Sound, yeah. He pulls me aside, he says, James, always remember in show business, the amateur copies the professional steals. So what I stole from Cotton, I stole my whole live show from Cotton and Butterfield. And I stole all my stage moves from Cotton. And I didn't steal, Butterfield didn't have any quote unquote stage moves, but I stole everything I could from Cotton in terms of being a band leader, in terms of putting on a show. You know, my harp playing was more influenced by Junior, who was also a Sonny Boy, influenced by Sonny Boy.
So play some for us.
Okay, let's see.
Bravo!
There we go.
Right, you know, that was great. You know, I remember once when you were playing, you opened up for Cotton at Night Stage, a nightclub in Cambridge, and me and Norman Gardner, our mutual friend on Martha's Vineyard, showed up early to hang out with Cotton and hang out with you and the bands. And all of a sudden, we pull up in the middle of the day, 4 hours before the show, and there's Cotton sitting all alone on a bench under the tree in front of the club. People walking by, not knowing the greatest harp player on the planet is just sitting there. So me and Norman just sat down with him, smoked a few joints, caught up with him, and just people watched with James Cotton, and it was just amazing.
Yeah, you know, Cotton was definitely, I think, the greatest harmonica player of his time. And when you consider that, when he was a young man in his teens, Sonny Boy Williamson gave him his band. So he was like riveted as a student of Sonny Boy's. And then eventually when he joined Muddy Waters' band, Muddy wanted to play everything exactly like Little Walter. So then he played exactly like Little Walter. I mean, so he was just a genius with that instrument. And the other thing that comes out in this movie that we're making about him is, you know, he was there was that one tour with Johnny Winter and James Cotton and Muddy Waters that really, because of Johnny Winter and because of that record Hard Again that Johnny produced for Muddy, that really kind of brought, you know, Chicago style blues to a lot of rock and roll people.
Absolutely.
But what really did it more than that was James Cotton, who was managed by Albert Grossman. So at that time, so he was out touring with Janis Joplin, Led Zeppelin, The Doors, the Grateful Dead. And the reason Cotton was able to tour with these rock and roll bands, with these, you know, dynamic front people and electric guitars, is because his stage presence, nobody had his stage presence was as strong as Janis Joplin, as strong as Jim Morrison, as strong as Robert Plant. He was an incredibly strong front man. But the interesting thing is he had so much power in his harmonica that he could compete with the electric guitars of those days. And that's why no other Chicago band could have fit in those big rock and roll tours the way that Cotton did. But Cotton could tour with any rock and roll band, from Led Zeppelin to the Doors to Janis, because he had the extreme power in his instrument that was able to keep up with the power of the electric guitars. And he had he was a force of nature as a front man. So that's why Cotton was able to tour. And I think Cotton, more than any other band, was really the one who, I mean, by the end of these shows, you know, these hippies that came, here in Chicago, high energy, the highest energy, most powerful Chicago blues you've ever heard came from James Cotton, and well, Paul Butterfield too. But between Paul Butterfield and James Cotton, they were blowing people away. And
James, you're like that too. You're talking about how he could play with a lot of different genres. Look at what you did you hooked up with Alex Taylor, who was pretty much a folkie from the Taylor family in Martha's Vineyard. James Taylor, Livingston, Kate, Huey, and you got a great band. That song Down in Florida, I still sing it in my head.
Yeah, I'm thinking about revamping that one and doing it again. But Alex is a little different than the rest of the Taylors because he had this really powerful rhythm and blues voice.
Great voice.
I liken him to like James Carr, who and everyone knows Otis Redding, but everybody who knows and loves Otis Redding should listen to James Carr because James Carr and Otis Redding were basically on the same level. So Alex was more R&B, but he's the one who took the Taylor family, according to stories that I've heard. And, of course, I've become pretty close with the members of the Taylor family over the years. And by the way, Katie is making a new record now, and she's got everybody in the world playing on it. But
are you on it?
No, but I'm a little. I already talked to Katie about that. But anyway, but he was like an R&B guy, and I remember one of the last songs that he wrote before he passed, which pretty much describes his life. The song was, "I'm smoking at the gas pumps and my butt's about to fall."
Hey, you've had a lot of band members who have been in your band that have gone on to fame outside, later when they left your band. Jeff Golub went to Rod Stewart, Bobby Chenard went to Alice Cooper, Paul Murphy went to Duke Robillard's band. Who am I forgetting?
Virtually everybody that I've hired in my band has gone on to have a much bigger career than me, but Billy Squier, the Billy Squier band basically was the James Montgomery Band. I was hanging out with Max Sand, the DJ, and who, by the way, I saw recently. She looks great. We did a WBCN reunion last December, just before the pandemic. But anyway, and I had Katie Taylor singing with me that day. But anyway, sitting around with Max Sand one night, and we had to audition guitar players. And I said, "Oh my God, I hate auditioning guitar players." And Billy Squier was with us. He said, "I'll tell you what. I'll play guitar in your band until you find a guitar player." So I said, "Great." So he joined my band for 6 months. And then when he started his band, he had Jeff Golub and Bobby Chenard, who were both players with me. So basically the Billy Squier band then Stroke, if I'd have only written that song, that could have been me. But anyway, so, I've had a lot of people go on from my band, and I've mentored, people like Grace Kelly and other people.
Ace of Sax.
That have gone on, and Grace Kelly, I think, is maybe the most talented young musician I know.
You also played with Barry Calso, who I introduced you to.
Yeah, I did, and I actually was on a record with Barry Calso that he made before he passed away, and you know what? There were 4 hit records on that, and I don't know. I don't know, the guy who did the recording wanted to release it after Barry's death. He disappeared during Katrina, so no one really knows what happened to him. But anyway, I've had a lot of people go through my band. Steve Barbuto's now playing with Commander Cody and the Lost Planet Airmen. And, I had a guy, one of my bass players went on to play with one of those LA pop groups who had a platinum record.
You've also played with Harvey Brooks, the famous Harvey Brooks.
Yeah, Harvey Brooks was in the band for a little bit. We used to sit at our house out in Littleton, and he'd spend the day playing his bass along with television commercials. So.
Well, did you know from the Shabu All Stars those days?
I think I met Harvey when he was with the Electric Flag. I think I met him back then.
Well, he graciously is allowing me to use on this podcast the intro and the outro music, but it's unreleased music that's coming out on his next album.
Oh, that's great. He's a tremendous guy, and talk about a go-to bass player. I mean, he for a while, he was the guy. I mean, the business has changed a lot since then, and there's a lot of the guys out there now. But Harvey Brooks was like the god of the bow down to god of bass players for quite some time.
Hey, you've also played, I know this for a fact because I've heard this story, but this is a great story. You've also played with Mick Jagger, B.B. King, Muddy, and the guys in Aerosmith and the Jay Giles Band. Tell everybody about the Mick Jagger story.
Well, it wasn't so much that I played with him on stage. It's like
No.
We were playing New Year's Eve at a place called Trax. It was owned by this guy, Jimmy Poulos, JP. And he was like, he had a club on a small little nightclub bar on the east side. And then he had like a big, huge nightclub, which was the most fashionable club in New York at the time, called Trax. It was big, and so we did New Year's Eve there, and I had the Uptown Horns, and I had the studio band from Gamble and Huff, who played on all the OJ stuff and everything. Plus, I had Bobby Chenard on drums, and I had Wayne Kramer from the MC5 on guitar, and it was a killer band. And so I always do the Jackie Wilson stuff, where whenever I bring somebody on stage to sit in, I always like to play a vamp and bring them on to music, rather than here they come and have them walk out. I like to have them walk out to music. And then when they leave, I start the music up. It's just Jackie Wilson stuff, and ask Peter Wolf about Jackie Wilson. There's a story that he had an old one of those cellulose movie machines that he burned all the cellulose because he was backing it up and forth to watch Jackie Wilson. But anyway, so I come off stage, and when I get back into we did 2 or 3 encores, and then finally I'm going, well, that's it. I'm going back to the stage this time. We've done a couple of encores. That's it. We probably didn't have any more songs, but anyway. So I go back into my dressing room, and it's just Mick. And over my life I've met a lot of people, and I'm never really intimidated. And especially I like meeting people out, outside of music, like I mentioned earlier, Arthur Miller, and I love meeting actors and literary people like Norman Mailer. I spent some time with him, and then in the music business, I met everybody. I met Jimmy Carter. I know a lot of people. But there was something about, and I think maybe it was just the shock of just walking in and just seeing Mick just standing there looking at me. Hey, mate, what's going on? Whatever he said. And I was just like frozen for a minute. It took a minute or two for me to compute, well, wait a minute. That's Mick sitting there, right? So the band hadn't come in yet, and I wanted to strike up a conversation, So I just say, Mick, something to the effect of, I'm not sure that I ever would have gotten into Muddy Waters as much as I did if it hadn't been for listening to some of your records in early days. So that all of a sudden, boom, Muddy Waters. Who doesn't want to talk about that?
Yeah.
So we start going. Oh yeah, remember that song "Rich Man's Woman"? And he goes, yeah, it started like this. Whoa, yeah, child, yeah, hey, yeah, yeah. Oh, 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 yeah, child. And no, Mick. It goes, oh, yeah, child. Hey, 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 yeah. How, yeah. And so we're going back and forth, trying to figure out how Muddy started that song, because he started with like a all by himself on a vocal like that, and then the band comes in on the floor. So we had a ball, and once we got past that, the rest of the night was, who cares? So we played some harmonica together, and we ended up in his limousine with a couple of blondes and Barbara Holiday and we had a ball. It was a great night, and I thought he was a wonderful guy, and I got to sing and play with him. And honestly, in retrospect, there's probably a better way to sing and play with Mick than to come up on stage and sit in with him and have him shake my hand and leave,
For sure, yeah. Well, and now that you've told us and we talked about how you met Mick, I think that I should bring up how you met me. I think that would be a good way to just keep going.
I've kind of forgotten that. Do we have to bring it up?
No, the way we met is because Danny Moe, your bassist, and Jim Kersey, your drummer, were in my band, Boney Maroney, before
I
they were
remember
in your
this now.
band.
I remember this.
And, Danny Moe's a professor in
You were
Berkeley now.
playing that little place on Harvard Street, right?
Yeah, Bunratty's. And, over the years, you and I just got to be real tight. And, I've done interviews over the years, many. The most recent one is I did your bio in the Music Museum of New England. That's MMONE.com, folks. I did a Blues Blast magazine in Illinois story in 2017. And I did the Noise story, at the time, the longest entertainment publication in New England in 2012. And you also played at my wedding in 1994. And it was out of state in New Jersey on a Saturday night. And James, you were great. You gave up.
Yeah, and the listeners should know I actually got paid. And but anyway.
But no, actually,
I didn't know. I said, it's AJ. You might not have the dough. I'm kidding, AJ. But anyway, the other thing the listeners should know.
You didn't get paid. You only charged me for transportation expenses. That was nothing.
I know. I chipped in. But the other thing the listeners should know is that for the longest time, whenever I was playing, and AJ was in the crowd, I'd give him a little high sign, and he'd come up on stage, and we'd get a full bottle of beer, and we'd drink it down in one gulp.
Well, what you used to do is
and AJ, it would take me like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. Take me 5 or 6 seconds to drink a whole beer. AJ could drink a whole beer 1,000 in maybe less than 2 seconds.
You would say to me, AJ, can you get me a beer? And I'd walk on stage with 2. We'd down it, and then you'd go into your next song. But I remember about my wedding.
It's not to be encouraged, by the way.
I remember about my wedding. You said for years the best thing about playing that gig was hearing my mother call me Johnny.
Oh yeah. I kept thinking, who are they talking to?
Dave Ramsey, your guitarist at the time, used to play keyboards in Mose Allison's band. And at my wedding, he played about an hour's worth of jazz on the piano before he did the wedding march.
Oh yeah. That's how I remember that.
That was cool. And James, another thing that's really cool that you did is that you drew a portrait of me that I have hanging on my wall next to me. Peter Wolf, also of the Jay Giles Band, also drew one of me, and they're hanging together. Why'd you become a musician instead of an artist? It's a great picture.
Well, I didn't have a natural talent to be a musician. My natural talent was for drawing and painting. When I was like in junior high and high school, before I guess I started playing like maybe my second year in high school, maybe. But up until then, I was like, always the number 1 or 2 person in my art classes, and I had these blue ribbons for my artwork, but then, I heard Chris Theo from the Uptown Horns, and we're still playing together. So we've been playing together for 55 years, maybe longer than that now that I think about it. But anyway, I heard a jug band, and I heard live blues for the first time. And it just struck this chord in me. And I had a radio show for 6 years, and I interviewed over 110 blues musicians. And every one of them, almost every one of them can tell you the moment. Bonnie Raitt was at a campfire at camp, and the counselor played a blues song, and it hit her. Greg Allman was at a barbecue in Florida. Everyone, John Lee Hooker was walking down the street and heard people, James Cotton heard Sonny Boy Williamson. Every one of them has a moment. So I had this moment when I heard Crispin play Casey Moan. It was a jug band when they played a blues song rather than a ragtime song. So that hit me, and so, there was something about blues harmonica that just resonated with me. So I kind of spent most of my time trying to get into that band, which I did eventually, the front man for that band. And then when they left, I started the first white blues band in Detroit, when I was in high school. And
You're white?
Yeah. I actually had a tour get canceled in Europe one time when they found out I was white. James Montgomery's white. Yeah, well, we're canceling the tour. But anyway, so I just devoted all my time to music, and then I went to BU because I wanted to be a writer. And but I had a band in high school. I had a band in college, and my college band did so well that, I was set up for a major record deal as soon as I graduated from college. So it's like, the one thing that I was naturally gifted for, I really put on hold to chase after writing and chase after music. I mean, eventually, I've become a pretty good musician.
Backstroke lover, always hiding beneath the cover till I talk to your daddy. He said you ain't seen nothing till you're down on a muffin, and it's sure to be a change in your way. I met a cheerleader, was a real young leader, all the time I could reminisce. 'Cause the best things are loving with a sister and a cousin, all started with a little kiss.
You did an Aerosmith cover for my compilation CD also. Speaking of music, you did, my album came out and it was Boston Gets a Grip. You can all look it up on YouTube, folks. James, you did a killer version of Walk This Way. And you made it a harp song rather than the Joe Perry Aerosmith guitar-driven song.
Well, what I did in that song, the first third of the song, I did as if Mose Allison was doing it, because Mose was a huge influence on me when I was growing up. I actually got to know him pretty well, and when this movie I was in with Morgan Freeman and Willie Nelson about Delta Blues, we did a question and answer tour in a couple of places with that, and Mose was part of the panel. And I had Mose on my radio show, so I got to know him. He was such a curmudgeon, but such a big influence on me, and I just think one of the greatest blues poets that's ever lived. So what I thought is, how would Mose Allison play Walk This Way, So I did a kind of a, three little kittens then stopped in the mitten, getting ready to play. Whatever the words are, I forget them now. And then I went right into straight ahead rockabilly. Three little kittens, like Sleepy LaBeef. That was, so my inspiration for that was Mose Allison and Sleepy LaBeef. So
it's a great song.
It's a great version. I love it. It's still one of my favorite things that I've ever recorded. Thank you, AJ, for forcing me to get in there and do it.
So I took a big chance at the high school dance with the missy who was ready to play. Was it me she was fooling, 'cause she knew what she was doing when I know that love was here to stay. She told me to walk this way, walk this way, walk this way, like this. Schoolgirl, sweetie, when the class kind of says the little skirts climbing under the knee. There was 3 young ladies in the school gym block, and I noticed they were looking at me. I was a high school lover, never met with a lady, said a boy, tell me something I missed. But then my next door neighbor was a daughter, had a baby, so I gave her just a little kiss. I like this. So I took a little chance at the high school dance with the missus who was ready to play. Wasn't me, she was fooling, 'cause she knew what she was doing when she told me how to walk this way. She told me to walk this way, walk this way.
Well, how come it took you, I came out with Boston, me and Mickey O came out with Boston does the Beatles, then Motown does Motown, then Boston gets stoned. How come it took you until the fourth and final album to do a song? I must have asked you each time to do a song.
No, AJ, I was always at the bottom of your list. It was like, Montgomery, no, not on this one. Montgomery, I don't think he's good on this. How can Montgomery sing a Beatles song, Maybe if we do some Village Fugs, they'll put him on that one.
Well, James, you're a funny guy. A lot of people don't realize that. Basically, you're an encyclopedia of jokes. Hey, I recently heard that Albert Einstein, might not have existed. It turns out he's just a theoretical physicist.
Boy, between me and Huey Lewis, we know every joke known to mankind. And I just got off the phone with Huey the other day because he was in an episode of The Blacklist, and he kind of brought it to my attention. But anyway, so here's a couple that me and Huey, AJ, my girlfriend calls me a stalker. Well, she's not my girlfriend yet. A guy comes home. His wife is making love to his next door neighbor on the living room floor. The guy says, "So what the hell is going on here?" She says, "See, I told you he was stupid." So listen, we had quite a snowstorm here today down here in Newport, and it kind of iced over with the freezing temperatures. Matter of fact, just yesterday I saw this poor old lady slip and fall on the ice. Well, I think she was poor. She only had $1.27 in her purse.
That's great. All right, listen, James. We got to talk about this. You have two projects coming up, film documentaries. Why don't you tell us about what the first one's about your late gay activist brother, and the next one's about James Cotton. Please tell us a little bit about both, of the new documentaries, when they're coming out, and the website addresses so people can find out info about what's going on.
Well, we're making a movie about my younger brother Jeff, who was an activist and a tremendous hero in the LGBT
absolutely
movement. His first lover was shot and killed outside of a gay bar in Detroit, and when he talked to the police about it, they said, "We're not going to investigate it." And Jeff said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, it's just another gay killing and we don't have the resources." So that was, and that was his first boyfriend ever. And it took him a while, generally people who are gay, figure it out by the time they're 8 years old, So, between the time he's 8 and the time he's like 21 or 22, whenever this happened, it's a tough life. You really, especially his generation was one that was afraid to get beat up or to even get arrested. It was illegal to be gay when he first discovered it. So anyway, so he, and there was nowhere to turn. So he started an organization. I'll just make this quick. He started an organization, the Triangle Foundation, where he's able to make it into $1 million a year foundation. He ended up on the Aryan Nation hit list, and he had people come in his office and shoot at him. One time he's doing 65 miles an hour and the wheel fell off his car, and the guy he took it to said this was done on purpose. He got threatened to have the hotel he was staying, lecturing, and bombed. He had to register under another name and have a bodyguard, have a state police bodyguard. So anyway, it's a compelling story. And he ended up having a debilitating disease. So it's like a really complex story about a wonderful, wonderful warrior. And it's that one is almost done. And then the other one.
What's the web address if people want to find out about?
Oh yeah, absolutely. America, You Kill Me. It was the title of a speech that he gave at Brown University, and I was at there when he gave the speech. He wrote that speech after they killed Matthew Shepard and left him tied to a fence out in Wyoming. So he was the one that went out. He was the guy who did the court TV thing for Jenny Jones trial, and
right.
and he was the leading advocate for the defense and the prosecution of the guys that killed Matthew Shepard. Anyway, so it's America You Kill Me, and there's
.com.
Yeah, and if you scroll down, you can see a trailer, a 5-minute trailer, and there's also a place to donate to the our fiscal sponsor, Developmental Documentary Educational Resources, DER. So they can do that. And then the other one is about James Cotton, and we've talked about Cotton already, and some of the things I've mentioned are pointed out in the film. But we did a 2-day shoot in Fall River where we brought all these great harmonica players from all over the country, and we sat there for 2 days and talked about Cotton and played, and that's a large part of the film. And then, we have interviews with Steve Miller and Buddy Guy and Bobby Rush and Jimmy Vaughn, and it's a great movie, and it's more than just a biopic. We really tied in, to the cultural elements of being born with nothing and translating that into the city. So it's really relevant to the Black Lives Matter movement as well, because that's not just a biopic. It also talks about his legacy and about the struggle of African Americans in this country for equal treatment. So, and that one you can go to www.jamescottonfilm.com.
And now, James, for the question that I always end my podcast, Wachtelligence, with: what was the first concert you ever attended?
My first concert, I must have been in 7th grade, maybe 6th or 7th grade. And my mom took us down to Olympia Stadium, the 3 boys.
In Detroit?
Yep. To see on their very first tour, the Beatles. So my first concert ever was the biggest band in the history of music, probably,
And what do you remember about that?
Oh my God, I remember everything about it. When you're little, there's some things you remember, like getting my polio shot. I'll never forget that. I'm not going there, Mom. Yes, you are.
Who was your favorite Beatle?
I always liked George, and eventually my brother John, who was vice president of Warner Brothers then, was in charge of promoting George Harrison when his Dark Horse label signed to Warner Brothers. So John was on the private plane with George Harrison touring the country, and I got to spend 3 days with George, which was great. And because, I studied Vedanta, which is the oldest scriptures known to mankind that basically are the basis of Hinduism. So, we didn't talk much about music. We just talked about, Satchidananda, But anyway, so I remember the screaming and the screaming and the screaming and going crazy and hearing "She Loves You, Yeah, Yeah," and that she was just 17. And, in those days, their catalogs was all these like sing-songy, rock and rolly things,
Yeah.
They weren't doing these intense, day after day, alone on a hill. No, none of that. It was just excitement. And I think the Bill Black combo opened up for him, which in the early days of rock and roll, there was some swing bands like that.
Bill Black from Elvis?
Well, yeah, who'd ventured into rock and roll,
Right.
They were still playing swing music, but with a rock beat, It was just, I think the term rock and roll had only been coined a couple of years earlier by, I think, Artie Woo-Woo Ginsburg or somebody like that. But anyway, I just remember seeing the band, my mom kind of starting out, "Oh my God, I don't get this," but by the end of the show, she was screaming too.
That's funny.
Yeah.
James.
The Beatles, not bad, huh?
James, thanks so much for being on Wachtelligence. It was a lot of fun. Thanks so much, buddy.
Well, I love you so much, and it's always, like I say, I'm shocked that someone gave you a pot. No, that's a joke. But anyway, AJ, congratulations. You're a great interviewer. You always have been. I'm sure you're going to have a ball with the show, and everybody who comes on is going to have a great time. And I really appreciate it. And thanks a lot. And make sure you send me text me a picture of that of my drawing and Peter Wolf's drawing, because I love Peter Wolf. He's one of the great figures in Boston music.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Wachtelligence. You can connect with me on Facebook at Wachtelligence. Thanks to my producers, my son Harrison and David Schwartz, and Harvey Brooks for my theme song. Don't forget to subscribe.
I don't care what you think of me. Don't need no jailer to set me free. Don't want strangers filling up my cup. Don't need no advisor to show me down from up.